Okay, well, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartley back with you today with another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast, and I'm very honored and humbled and blessed actually to welcome a very special guest today. I'm welcoming Mr. Desmond Wood all the way from California to Cyprus. We're reaching across time, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So absolutely amazing, and this man has an incredible journey. He is a Buddhist and mindfulness practitioner, truly an inspirational figure who shows that the answers are within. Has been on a long journey to become the man that he is today. Let me say that much. A seeker of truth and a person who I believe can share a lot of useful tips and techniques with you, the audience today, wherever you're watching from around the world. It doesn't matter. We are not saying you need to follow this path or that path. We're just pointing out the fact that maybe there's a different path than the one you were on that will lead to greater happiness and fulfillment and service. So we'll be finding out a lot more about life behind the scenes at a full time at a Buddhist non-profit monastic community, and we'll be finding out about some of Desmond's teaching and how he guides and is of service to others as well. So, my friend Desmond, thank you for taking time out of your morning to do this, and it really is such a blessing. So, thank you very much.
Hey, Lotus, for you as well. Good morning. Cheers from the Bay Area of Northern California, and I'm happy to be here. I had COVID-19 a few weeks ago, and it was pretty brutal for a couple of days. And I'm relatively healthy, healthier than most, and it still set me back. So be cautious, keep your immune system strong, keep your hands washed. We will have to deal with COVID-19 for a long time. It probably won't go away. It'll be just a nasty coronavirus, a common cold. So I feel happy that I can breathe normally and I'm not coughing nonstop. So that's a reason to be grateful. Simple things we take for granted. Respiration, particularly conscious respiration, to be able to breathe deeply and mindfully, which means attentively. We'll talk about that. What is mindfulness? My first mentor, Brother Freedom, talks about that a lot. And I'm glad that he addresses the issue of the buzzword of mindfulness, or Mick mindfulness, as it's being called, because people talk about it but don't really know what it is or give the Buddha proper credit for creating what we nowadays refer to via the umbrella term mindfulness.
Absolutely. Well, a very valuable clarification to start with. I had a feeling that the concept of correcting people's understanding would come into this, and I'd like to talk with you about that further. Before we do, I'm going to ask one other small point. Before we started recording just now, you read a very inspirational daily aspiration, and I know that you shared that with me personally, but I also think it would be very valuable for our listeners as well. As you know, I go with the flow. We were also talking about Bruce Lee, be like water and be
Mm,
flexible. So as soon as that came up, would you mind sharing it again this time, not only with myself, but with our viewers around the world, please, my friend? Thank you.
sure, it'd be my pleasure. This is from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Aspiration upon awakening. Today, I am fortunate to have woken up. I am alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it. I am going to use all my energy to develop myself, to expand my heart out to others, to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. I am going to have kind thoughts towards others. I am not going to get angry or think badly about others. I'm going to benefit others as much as I can. Now, that sounds initially quixotic, right? Like foolishly impossible, a really tall order. But actually, I've been working on this for years, and people consider me quite joyful and compassionate. But I used to be a lot more prone to anger, agitation, and frustration. Even today, little things can agitate me if I'm not very attentive. And so this is a very powerful aspiration from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He talks about anger too and not being fully transcendent. even though he might be telling us that to stay humble. We don't really know what's going on in anyone's mind stream. That's the point. But we know that we all deal with mental formations such as anger. I also want to point out that anger is an apex of other negative mental formations, agitation, and frustration that come together as a bundle. I've been really pondering this recently. And I was talking to ChatGPT via the new advanced voice mode, and it's very insightful. It told me that yes, anger is connected, bundled up with agitation and frustration. It's like the apex of agitation and frustration. It's not one thing.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you've started with this, my friend, because I know I kind of said this already before we started recording, but I'll repeat myself briefly for our audience because I relate to that personally, by the way, a great deal, first of all, as I mentioned. And as I already also mentioned, yes, I mean, you have a very kind and gentle and joyful presence, to be honest. And as I'm sure you're aware, with spiritual practitioners like Brother Freedom, for example, just by sitting in their presence, you can feel the wash or that peacefulness and that joy. But you know, the fact that you've struggled with anger, I've struggled with it myself, so it doesn't surprise me because you know you get a little bit of a vibe that you're working through that as well. And I relate
Mhm.
so much. I mean, I used to feel it all the time, and it's kind of like when thunder, you know, when there's a storm cloud, and you know when you hear the thunder rolling from far away, you know, and it's getting closer and it's getting closer, you know, thing. And and I know in California you have some more crazy weather than what we have over here, so you know what I
Mhm.
mean. And you know that's so it's very valuable because as I said earlier, spirituality is not detached from life; it's the immersion in and the transformation of
Yes,
life experiences.
yes.
So making this relatable to people, which is something that I must say His Holiness the Dalai Lama does well, actually, because you know you look at his journey, and even though he's up there as His Holiness, he's very good at making it relatable. And when you share that from your own journey as well, it's so relatable to so many people. So thank you very much for starting there. I'd like
My
to
pleasure. One point I wanted to bring up on the aspiration that just came to mind, since you are all about the flow,
very
is
much.
that I am not going to think badly about others. So if
Mm,
someone, myself or others, get angry, instead of judging them, you accept it. This is the human condition. We're prone to anger and agitation. But do we identify with it? Or do we just witness it? Oh, there's anger and the witness of it. That's the key.
mm. It's so freeing, isn't it? And when it's just
Yes.
this joy.
When we remember, when we remember that.
Well,
Otherwise, we're just angry and cranky, and no one wants to be around us, right? In that state of being.
absolutely, yes. Well, as you know all too well, and I know there's no peace, there's no joy there for anyone else, but mostly for ourselves. You know, I mean, the old adage of anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person
Mm.
to die. You know, it's one of those things that well, it's true, isn't it? I mean, and that's it. When I've been angry in the past, I've done myself a lot more damage than anyone else. But anyway, that's another story. So it's a really good place to start off with. And yes, going with the flow. Now, on the subject of the flow, you know, going back to where things started for you, like I said earlier, I mean, I really don't mind if you like to go back to where you were born, where you actually come from, or if you'd like to skip ahead a little bit and where you found Buddhism or spirituality in some form. I mean, I'm very flexible. What it's all about is just showing people that you've been through many years of practice, but it didn't start off that way. You know, there was obviously things that led you, and you've had quite a varied career as well, from what I've seen on LinkedIn as well, which is really cool. So let's go back just for a moment and just touch on the beginnings,
Mhm.
however far back you'd like to go, my friend. I'm easy about that.
Sure. Well, I've identified as being spiritual since adolescence, perhaps as a preteen, somewhere around 12 or 13 years old. And like many Americans, especially other African Americans, I was raised in a Christian household. But a more liberal Christian household. No one was a fundamental Bible thumping Baptist. So I think many people know what that the Lord said, you know. It
Oh,
wasn't
yes.
that type of experience. There was a KJV, King James Version Bible, Old English in the house, a big one. And I used to read that. In fact, I read it from beginning to end. So I had a very advanced vocabulary because of that. Reading Old English, as a child and understanding it. So that in hindsight shows my aptitude for being intellectual. Comes from my father. We'll get into that. Very intelligent people, many of whom on my father's side of the family are self-taught and savants. So I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. My father is a self-taught musician. He's a savant. He was born with that ability, according to my aunt Deborah. He was playing classical music on the piano, probably 6 or 7 years old. No one taught him. He's also prone to schizophrenia, and they come together, we found out. That is, scientists, geneticists. So that's intriguing. Born with a knack for a proclivity towards spirituality and being erudite, being scholastic and reading. So I started reading at a young age, and that led me to many different religious views. First, different branches of Christianity, and then no religion at all. So from childhood until my teenage years, I was going to the church infrequently, and then I decided that religion was no longer for me. I didn't believe in the God in the sky, the supernatural being idea anymore. But I didn't enter into militant atheism. I was just a very lax Christian. If someone would ask me, "Are you a Christian?" I would say, "Yes, I believe in God and so on." But I didn't really feel called, so to speak, the calling as others claim they've had. And so I drifted away from religion. And that lasted up until my 20s. But you can ask me more questions about childhood if you want more clarity, or we can jump around. I have no problem with that because you always get insights when people ask you questions about childhood, no matter how painful it may be or uncomfortable to
Absolutely.
deal with.
Well, I appreciate that because speaking about these things in a public forum is brave. I mean, I don't care what anyone says. It takes a form of courage to do that. What we're doing today is a form of public speaking. I read somewhere that public speaking is the number one fear in the world, even higher than death. I don't know if
Mm,
that's true, but I came across that. And
it
obviously,
sounds reasonable.
that's what they say, and so, especially speaking about personal things for the benefit of, well, all sentient beings, as you will understand, it does take a lot of courage. So, I appreciate that, first of all, before we go any further. And I respect that, by the way, before we go any further, that you have the courage to do that because, we're both doing this to help people. Going back to the childhood aspect, yes, I will go into one aspect if you don't mind. There is schizophrenia in my extended family, by the way, so I understand
Mm,
with my uncle
mm.
in particular, so I understand how that can develop. It's different if it's a parent, I must say. If you don't mind me asking about that, you obviously have what should we call it, the genius speak neurodiversity.
I
Um,
don't know about that, but
well, you
go
have.
ahead.
I say then that as a neurodiverse person myself, because I'm not a fan of labels, but I do have certain things with the autistic spectrum, ADHD, etc., and things of that nature. Let's just call it that. Shall we say that there is a very,
No, that's fair. I definitely consider myself neurodivergent.
yeah, and I mean
In
that.
hindsight, you're right. I was a very odd child in
Well,
many ways. So,
I mean it's a compliment though, because
yes,
I admire
in a
your,
positive way, not
yeah.
negative. I'm happy that I was an oddball child, for sure. I wouldn't change anything in my childhood because
That's
it made me the man I am today. So you were saying,
no.
continue.
Well, no, exactly that, really, my friend. Is just that I admire that you have that. inquiring and voracious intellect, and however you define that, I mean that's up to you. But I feel that I mean that as a compliment. What we were saying earlier about both of us being seekers of truth and everything, that's really where
Mhm.
I'm going with that. But anyway, not to go off on tangents. I was just taken aback by the relatability of a few things there. When it comes to your father's struggles and when it comes to the childhood elements. Would you mind touching on that a little bit briefly? Was that something that happened to him earlier on in your childhood? Was it something that happened a little bit later?
Mm.
I think that would be
Oh,
valuable insight as well because these topics are very misunderstood. So I would like to touch on that briefly, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
sure. Without revealing too much personal information about my beloved father, due to his condition, which started at a young age, I'm assuming, and I don't really know the entire story, but it was triggered via some traumatic event when he was younger, an argument with his brother, my uncle, who's no longer alive. And as a result of that, he struggled with addictions, which kept him out of my life. And so I didn't reconnect with my father until maybe 13 or 14, 15 years old. So I had a lot of time alone. And my mother also struggled with a drug addiction. So the books entertained me. The Life of the Mind. I discovered the beauty, the limitless realm of the mind as a young boy, and didn't even know it then, but having a powerful imagination, which, if the claim is true, Einstein said that imagination is more powerful than knowledge. Even if he didn't say that, it's true.
Mm,
So
absolutely.
that explains why I spent time reading the entire King James version of the Bible, which is voluminous, well over 1,000 pages, and things like that. So I spent a lot of time alone, which is why today I don't get bored. I'm
See,
always seeing or experiencing something that intrigues me in the mind, and mindfulness has enhanced that ability. So yes, I had a traumatic childhood, and that's just one aspect. No violence, though. No one beat me as a child, fortunately, but emotional neglect. A mother that's not around with affection, and a father who is not there to support me mentally or with his physical presence. So my grandmother and great grandmother raised me, but they were pretty much hands off because they were older, already 50s and up when I was a young boy. And I have one sibling, a sister, and we were very close back then because of what I just mentioned, not having a father around. So we had a close knit bond. We entertained each other.
well, as I've said, Desmond, my friend, I mean, it's powerful to share something like that because it might sound like a little bit of a cliche this, but there's so many people going through similar things and they feel like they're alone, especially in childhood as well, when you're going through certain things and they feel from a certain perspective normal, even if you know something's not right. I mean, I often find, even in my own life, but certainly with a lot of people I speak to, that it's only later you look back and think,
Mhm.
okay, so that wasn't like how it is for everyone, to varying degrees. I'm not sure if that was the case for you. I don't presume to know that. But at the same time, with you sharing that message, I hope it breaks down a few barriers there. And as I've said, particularly with mental illness or different modes of thought, neurodiversity, and all of these things, there's a lot of misunderstandings, misconceptions, movies that have been made that show some gross misconceptions. So it's very valuable to touch on a few of those things. So, okay, so the life of the mind, trying different religious faiths, obviously developing self-reliance, mental toughness, some of the attributes you have, even what you said earlier, by the way, with COVID, it's a very brutal illness. I've had that about 3 times, and so the fact that you're sitting here is also a testament to that toughness, that inner strength, I would say, and I can
Indeed.
that connects with meditation. So. makes or mindfulness, it makes a lot of sense. So as we progress a little bit further forward into your maybe your teenage years or your adolescence, I've also seen on your LinkedIn that you had different career ventures. You this employment, self-employment,
Oh, yes, all over the
ambition.
place.
Absolutely. So when did that
Yeah,
start to develop in terms of, there's a few different topics contained within one here because you have the ambition of starting your own business.
yes.
You have the seeking of truth, I guess, in the physical world as well, in terms of trying different things to see what suits you. And so there's a degree of variety here. Now, I'm not sure how much you'd like to share about that, but anything you would like to share would be, I think, very interesting and relevant for people. Thank you.
Well, probably like a lot of Americans who are millennials, born in 81, so I'm the older millennial. We started working around 15 years old. My first part-time job was at Steak and Shake, a popular chain you may know about. I don't think you have any of those in Europe. Maybe you do.
I don't
Are
think
you familiar with that Steak
I'm
and Shake? They have the
familiar.
flat burgers, very
Yeah,
flat, thin burgers.
familiar with it from the many Americans I speak to. Yes, I don't
Oh,
think
I
we
see.
have that over here though, but I've heard of it. Yes.
Yes, it's popular like McDonald's and White Castles and so on, Wendy's, Burger King, etc. So
Mm.
I was flipping burgers 15 years old, and that was my first job. But as many other teens, they don't last long. And so you jump around, you have one part-time job, save money, spend it, try to save again, and you're learning to be an adult with no one to groom you. Because when you're not in a household with optimal professional parents, you learn through the school of hard knocks. And that's how I and many other Americans learn, especially other African American youth. So my story is not too unique in that regard, that I had people around me who were into smoking weed and selling weed and other drugs, but I experimented with weed, marijuana, chronic, as it's called, to this day at a young age. I first got high when I was 15, maybe 14, with my best friend, my next door neighbor. And that led to years of being addicted to weed in high school. Smart, a lot of potential, but burned out through smoking too much. So that was stunted growth. Arrested development began then. I know that through hindsight. Life of the mind, but no discipline, no direction, no guidance. Just going here and there based upon the ethos, the environment, the milieu of the neighborhood. That had a huge influence on me, unsurprisingly, as a teenager. You look up to those around you. And so, even though being neurodivergent, I was led by my own mind, my own intuitions and inspirations, I was nonetheless influenced by men in the neighborhood, those who were bigger and stronger and popular. And so, sports wasn't my talent, it was lyrics. And so, I was known as a remarkable lyricist. People who knew me said, wow, this guy is incredible. And for me, it was just normal, second nature, but I could just spontaneously produce something like Jay-Z, Talib Kweli, Most Def, Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., and so on. I was just as talented as them, perhaps even more talented, some would say, linguistically, with the rich vocabulary I told you about. And so most people didn't have that ability around me. I took it for granted. But not having discipline means I didn't become the next great MC, lyricist, hip hop artist. So that gives you some idea of the type of young man I was. A lot of potential that wasn't maximized.
Yes, it does. Well, all I can say again is that so many people will relate with that. I mean, sadly, it's a story as old as time without the relevant guidance. And not to go off on a tangent with this, but with the whole concept of the breakdown of the family unit, and there's a whole topic you can go into with that with Western society. But suffice to say, and I know you mentioned about being raised by your grandparents, but there's still so much in Western society where our elders are disregarded and pushed to one side, whereas in many other countries they are valued. And I think that plays a
Mm,
very valuable role. I mean, I can't remember if I described this to you, but being from the UK, it's much the same. There's a lot more similarities now with the culture of the US than there ever were even in previous years, actually. But I'm over here in Cyprus now. I've been here for 1 year, and you see the strength of the family unit over here and the grandparents.
oh, Cyprus.
Yes, that's where I'm at now. One year. The sunshine. I mean, I know you're in California, so you'll have some sunshine over there, but the UK is very wet, rainy, and very insular, very antisocial, and so on in this day and age. So I felt a need to change certain things with that and to get away from. People say it's for the sunshine, it's for this and that. It's not really. I mean, it's actually for the pace of life and things. Going back to what I mentioned earlier about my own career, not to go off on a tangent with that, but when you've lived the hustle and bustle and the fast pace and the deadlines and hitting various markers, you're satisfied for a little while, but then it
Hmm.
passes and you need to hit something else and so on. I thought, well, I need to get away from all that, and here people are satisfied with a lot less, I would say, which is but in other
Mm,
ways, because they have each other as a very tight knit community, they actually have a lot more, even though it's not apparent at face value. So there's a lot of intangible things like that which most people don't understand as to why I left my home country a year ago for those sorts of changes. And it is a more mindful life. You're not always rushing and having to be here, having to be there. Um, People will turn up at an appointment and they can be, let's say, oh, I'm running half an hour late, or don't worry, and things that would never happen in the UK, the US in terms of timing and a lot of cultural differences. So it was right for me. It's not right for everyone. But anyway, that's a tangent. But with what you're saying, going back to what I was saying about the family unit and everything,
yes.
many people will relate to that. But you found your path. So the most important thing is that, or perhaps you consider it that you're finding your path. But as you said, it made you the man you are today, and that's the most important thing. Now,
Or shall we say the pathless?
yes, the pathless.
Pathless
Yes,
path.
that's true. That's true.
Paradoxes.
Yes.
Can't get around paradoxes. That
No,
will
that's
come up
very
over and over again.
yeah.
Paradoxes.
Yes, we will come back to that as well. So it doesn't slip my mind. With the, as you were saying about the lyrics and things, did you try to get into music or follow that passion? I mean, as you mentioned earlier,
Ah, good question.
writing.
Yes, I did. There was someone in the neighborhood who tried to get me in the industry, but it didn't work out for various reasons. I was very shy and also, like I said, a weed head.
Mm,
If you've heard that term before.
oh, yes.
I
Yeah.
was a weed head in high school, pothead, as some
Mm,
communities say. And so you can't really be productive. Most people can't when you are in that condition.
mm,
Plus, there's usury, and for various reasons that I don't really remember, it didn't work out.
mm,
I was introduced to some producers, but no record deal happened. And that was the end of that. But I continued for years just to freestyle for fun because that's the beauty of it. It's spontaneous. No one can even buy it, actually. This is priceless, a gift from nature. Nature gave me that gift. No one can take it away. I still have it. I applied through or to poetry and what I write. There's a rhythmic prose. When you read my essays, you'll see that. It comes out naturally. I don't even have to try. And when I learned other languages, I saw it too. Learning Vietnamese was like, wow, I'm learning how to say things rhythmically in another language. So you
mm,
can see it just goes right organically into the next language. This is innate, intrinsic.
absolutely. I can understand that though, because you strike me as one of those individuals where you see patterns in things. I appreciate that might be an oversimplification, slightly a generalization, but at the same time, when you're talking about language, the rhythm of music, the rhythm of words, different languages, and so forth, I can see that as being a real talent of yours as well. which is fascinating and very relevant because one of the important things about this and the lesson that you're sharing here is the authenticity and discovering your authentic self as well, which I think is, or perhaps undiscovering everything you are not. Again, and that's also a paradox. But
Mm,
the
mhm.
journey of transformation there, we'll come back to that also. To briefly mention that this might sound like a cliche, I apologize, it's a relevant question. When people are using drugs in that way, and by the way, where I come from in the UK, it's a massive, it's more endemic, it's more of an epidemic than any virus in terms of drug use, I would say.
Mm.
But obviously, the effects on the mental state and everything of that nature. Did that cause you any problems with mood or any other after effects from it, or were you generally on an even keel with it, but just as you said, struggling to be productive, if that makes sense? Because I
I
know.
was very avoidant.
Okay.
In fact, I was never diagnosed, but I had the paranoid aspect of paranoid schizophrenia, but I
Mhm.
didn't hear voices.
Okay.
And no, I'm sure I don't have full-blown schizophrenia, but these are a constellation of personality traits, and it
Mm.
runs in the family. So the paranoid schizophrenia, or as I now have discovered, HSP, hypersensitive person, was there. It was blatant, and I didn't even know it. So I avoided people. I was very avoidant, introverted up until years ago. No longer the case. I'm
Mm.
free from that. I can honestly say that I'm neither an introvert nor an extrovert. Ambivert, flexivert. I'm flexible. I enjoy solitude. I enjoy socializing. But I do talk less these days. When I met my first mentor, Brother Freedom, I was more talkative because I was going through a different experience, part of the counterbalance. Now it's counterbalanced. And so I can adapt, or it happens naturally based upon conditions,
Mm.
context. If I'm around very quiet people, I'm quiet. If I'm around people who are more talkative, I will contribute, but still need time to recharge. So, in that sense, I'm still a technical introvert, but I'm not trapped in introversion, if that makes sense.
Oh, it
Doesn't define me.
makes a lot of sense there actually,
I'm
because
not shy anymore. I'll say that, that's for sure. Not around women, not around anyone. And a lot of men know what I'm talking about. That holds a lot of men back being shy. Oh no, she sees me. What will I say? Oh,
mm,
that's the one I really like. Oh, don't get too close. I have to say the right thing. Done. All of that's gone. Of course, I'm a monk now, but even when I randomly talk to women in public, it happens. You can't avoid people forever. And I noticed some years ago, it's gone now. No more heart racing. Wow, I feel normal now. Feel at ease.
mm. Is that due to mindful practices and
For sure.
mm,
Yes. And
mm.
it came from Deer Park. I'll give them credit. I was transformed at Deer Park Monastery, beginning with Brother Freedom, my first mentor. Can
Well,
never thank him enough. He's
let's,
one of the greatest counterbalancing forces in my life. And
let's,
everyone needs those type of counterbalancing figures.
mm. Let's give him a mention then, I think, because as much as we're talking about your background and so forth, people will want to hear about this. And in the time that we have, we've given a little bit of context. Now, you have to be aware as well that in the time we talk today, sort of hour and a half, probably is what I aim for maximum, then we'll only scratch the surface, I mean, especially with a person as deep as you are. I mean that as a compliment. A lot of people say that they're deep, but there's a lot of limitless depths there with yourself. So we will only scratch the surface, but as long as we share some relevant things for people, which we're already doing in terms of transformation, progression, healing, however you define that, then I'm happy. And I always say, if it touches even one person, then we've done our work. It will touch more than that, but the principle is sound that the right people at the right time will be attracted to this. Anyway, in terms of your transformation and finding Buddhism or Buddhism finding you, depending how you look at that, Brother Freedom, we're also going to extend my sincere thanks to him for some lessons and tremendous transformative advice that he shared with me. How did that happen for you? You'd obviously kicked the habit, not to use a cliche there, at some point, perhaps before, perhaps during, I'm not sure. And
Oh
it,
yes, way before then.
okay,
Yeah, so I from 15 till around 19 years old, I smoked a lot of weed, various forms, the bunk, as it was called, or banner, weak grade to the high grade. The high grade intensified my paranoia. And so I didn't pick that up anymore. I had some Jamaican chronic, some Jamaican funk, as it was called. You probably have heard that time before.
yes.
And so the vernacular. And so after that, I was like, oh no, that's too strong for me. And then I discovered, and we definitely won't go down this rabbit hole, Islam.
Mm.
And that is how I learned to speak, read, and write classical Arabic. From 19 till around the age of 23, I was a Muslim. First started out by exploring Sufism, Tasawwuf, the inner path of, or the esoteric dimension of Islam. And then I was learning Arabic at the time. I met someone in the neighborhood, a nearby coffee shop, and he could read Arabic. I was like, wow, this man is reading classical Arabic. What is that? He's like, this is the Quran. And being young and naive and looking for role models, clearly, right? Given what I told you about my childhood, that all makes sense. Looking for a father figure type. So here, this intelligent, tall African American man who can read and write classical Arabic, who can speak Arabic, who's traveled to many different countries. I'm interested. He taught me how to read Arabic, and then having an autodidactic nature, as I told you about, I taught myself the rest. He gave me an introduction, and that was it. I remember that within a couple of weeks, I could read Arabic, and then I began to seriously contemplate Islam, the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad, Allah, and all of that. And so I entered that world and was in that world for several years. Short version, in a nutshell. Just like with Christianity, I saw blind spots. I saw logical inconsistencies. I didn't see it as other Muslims or Christians who view the Bible as infallible. I didn't believe in the infallibility of these so-called divinely inspired texts. And that's why I couldn't stay in that religion for too long. And so after Islam, which was around 23, 24 years old, 2003 was the year I was done with religion, but I continued to study different spiritual texts, different philosophical systems. Fast forward to 2017, 2016, 2017, I discovered Buddhism at a weekly meetup for meditation and then at a Tibetan temple in Indianapolis. That's when I met Buddhist monks, Tibetan monks, and then I began to explore the noble, timeless truths. And here I am now, a practitioner of the way of the Dharma. But I don't consider it a religion. And this is where things change. This is the great distinction I've discovered that I can never talk about enough. That while it is true that in many ways Buddhism is a religion, it started via the awakening of the Buddha. And that's not a religion, that's an experience, a profound, ineffable experience that we all will have to have, and that we will have in series, because I believe in awakenings, not the awakening, awakenings. Or as Jack Cornfield said in one of his epic essays, enlightenments, not enlightenment. There's an S there, a series, limitless series of awakenings. So Christianity, Islam, and all the different things. I left out the fourth way, attributed to George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, Turkish. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Are you familiar with the fourth way system?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay, so P.D. Ouspensky and so on. I dabbled into, not dabbled, I was deep into that
Mm,
prior to Buddhism. And so I was already doing a lot of what we think of when we talk about mindfulness before Buddhism:
mm,
self observation, self study. You see, having a magnetic center that pulls me towards certain truths, practicing presence before I discovered Eckhart Tolle and others. There's a lot to go into. So there to give you an idea of the different things that I was practicing. So when I came to Buddhism, I already had an inner practice. It was just expressed differently, or let's say put into a different container around characterized by different guardrails, constraints, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, more than you may realize, not only for myself, but I feel for many people listening to this, because that journey of trying different things and exploring different options, and as we were speaking about before we started recording, realizing in the end that the answers are within us, not without us, is a big part of that process. It's remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable the journey, how you found, as you were saying there, not a religion. I always say the same thing, so it's refreshing to hear somebody else understanding that. You know, I had a very similar experience with that process. I'm resisting the temptation to go off on different tangents with you, by the way,
Sure.
because there's a lot
Yes.
of things. It's nice, but there's a lot of things that are actually very similar to me. But anyway, so yes, in terms of your, shall we say, immersion into this process, I think that's very important. You mentioned something about that earlier when we were talking. I'd like to go through that process in whichever form it takes for you, because the process of immersion in Buddhism has the appearance of outward changes to other people in terms of what you're going through, but it is, as I've already said, an inner journey primarily. So I'd imagine that went through a series of steps. It's probably not an overnight thing by any means, but certainly in terms of, as you were saying about trying the different texts, and with myself, even within Buddhism, it was the same. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, then Thich Nhat Hanh, then certain Tibetan teachers, and so on and on it went. But for you, when you decided to really commit to this, really dive in head first, really immerse yourself within the Buddhist teachings, whereas these other faiths, as you say, didn't satisfy you, you found the blind spots and so forth. With this, and I'm acknowledging that distinction that it's not a religion, but with this in terms of a spiritual practice or a lifestyle, what was the decision like to immerse yourself more fully into this process as you are today as a monk? Because that in itself is a remarkable decision that I think people would like to hear more.
Mm. Yeah, it is remarkable and perplexing
Mm,
from the point of view of an outsider looking in. I can see that even myself in hindsight, I can see that unsurprisingly, I suspended certain aspects of the mind, of intelligence, of being critical to dive into this path because I was inspired by the life of the Buddha, one who just said, I'm done, walking away from his beautiful wife and opulent lifestyle. Even if we don't consider all of the extravagant aspects of the mythos form of the tale of the Buddha, we can say he was a wealthy person, an aristocrat, today's term. He was born into a wealthy family, and he turned his back on all of that. And so that inspires lots of people, though I think, as you mentioned before, many people don't act upon that idea. But the notion of the possibility of leaving everything behind, except what you need: food, clothes, shelter, a little bit of money. And so I was struggling as an entrepreneur. I had my limousine business at the time, S Class LLC, signature class inspired by Mercedes, the S Class. So that's where the S comes from. S Class LLC, signature class, limited liability company that I founded in 2015 myself. Uber was around at the time, and it temporarily boosted my income and then disrupted the market. As I'm sure you know, lots of people know about the story of Uber's rise to success. It initially helped us small business owners and then crushed us by lowering prices. And so I was already in the transportation business anyway as a taxi driver before that. So going back to childhood or teenage years, at around the age of actually young adult, 22 years old, I started making money easily in the taxi cab business. A friend of mine from Africa, an entrepreneur, before I left Islam, I was still Muslim at the time. He showed me how easy it is to make money. So you get this vehicle, you rent it for X amount of money per week, and you can make $150, $200 a day. That's a lot back in 2003 or 2004. And so that's why I didn't want a traditional job. And that also derailed my higher education ambitions because I was making easy money, which clouds the intellect. See, this is all lessons for those who are listening. So if you're in your 20s and you're making a lot of money, don't shirk education, even if it's through getting credentials and not necessarily the traditional 2-year associate degree or 4-year BA, BS path. Don't don't underestimate formal education, even if you're naturally intelligent and talented and clever. You want credentials in this world. It matters. But in any case, I am where I am because of the path that I took, and it allowed me to cultivate different aspects of intelligence. So that's also very important. So tie all this together, I was looking for a way out. I was inspired by the way of the Buddha. He turned his back on the world. He left it all behind. I was reading Thich Nhat Hanh, and he talked about how happy monastics can be without a bank account, without a professional lifestyle that one can be attached to in so many words. He didn't say it exactly like that, but that appealed to me. And so, without thinking so much, I told a good friend of mine I want to become a monk, and he said, "Do it." I traveled to Nepal in 2018, spent some weeks over in the Himalayan region where some of the highest wisdom is taught and discovered. And I was inspired by other Tibetan monks I won't mention now. Well, I'll mention one, Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, the monk who's famous for talking about the monkey mind, yada, 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 on YouTube. That was years ago. I don't know if you remember him. He's quite famous now. I was inspired by him. He looked so happy and peaceful wearing those robes, saffron robes. Another Theravada monk I was watching on YouTube. So all of that together inspired me to leave the world behind. I wasn't very successful, but I lived on my own since the age of 22. No roommates, girlfriends here and there, a few relationships that lasted almost 2 years, but for the most part, I was a loner. Being neurodivergent, as you know, you're picky. And so I always found flaws. We now know why that's the case. Newsflash, unsatisfactoriness. Life entails dissatisfaction, not life is dissatisfaction. One way to translate dukkha, but it entails unsatisfactoriness. And so now I understand clearly why I was never totally satisfied in a relationship because, quote, I am my greatest lover and my own friend. There's no greater lover than my own self, in quotation marks. That's liberating to know that. No one will ever love me like I love myself. I'm telling you and everyone else this. I know that clearly. No one will ever be a greater lover than myself. I don't know if you ever heard that before from a monk. We can unpack that one day. Exactly what I mean by that. I'm already whole and complete. So going forward in life, I would just be sharing part of my unlimited self with another limitless self that's already whole and complete,
Yeah, that's very
if that
valuable.
resonates with you.
It does. I was just taking it in actually because that's very valuable. That's also a process I've been through. I'm quite amazed by this because I'm doing this interview for the service to others. But I must admit, there's so many things you're sharing here that I'm really resonating with and thinking, wow, I've been through that as well. And the whole self-love and for me, it was a process of repairing damaged self-esteem and then realizing that that entire concept was a falsehood, with in terms of what you're saying there with self-love. That one, that one is still a process I'm actually going through, I must admit, personally. So, but it does make a lot of sense. with what you're saying there. And again, very, very valuable because in the world today, so many aspects ranging from the education system to social media to so many things that gear people towards compassion, gear people towards lowering their self-esteem from that perception. So it's a very valuable lesson to share with that as well. I mean, I deeply respect the vulnerability that you are sharing with this. So please do continue from that point forward.
Sure. Well, I mean, I will admit, of course, I still like women. The type of women I liked before, I still feel attracted to.
Mm,
Curvy women, the golden ratio. I mean, the hip to waist ratio that
yeah,
we men are biologically primed to hone in on. That
yeah,
still appeals to me, but I'm not identified with it, and I'm happy without it.
mm,
And so
yeah,
going forward in life, I could see myself never going back to old habits again. Some things have been transcended because I now know that even when the ego leads us to the wrong places, it's conditioned to try to preserve and help us, evolutionarily speaking. Most of it's bundled up with the limbic system. So fight, flight, freeze, FUCK. There's one cognitive psychologist said, I think it was James David Buss, the
mm,
evolutionary psychologist. That's something you want to study, by the way. See, I'm not just limited to Buddhism. I've always and continue to learn and to correct blind spots,
absolutely. Well,
correct vision.
yeah. I mean,
Sharpen your vision, right? Sharpen the vision. And that means
absolutely.
studying other things.
Yeah. I mean, it does come to. I'm sorry to cut in there, but it just to say
No, that's
absolutely,
pleasure.
I'm with you on that because it is all connected. I mean, specifically. I probably won't have time for this today, but even with myself, you're saying there, evolutionary psychology, quantum physics, neuroscience. I mean, there's so many other things that I also look into, and I will look up James that you mentioned there a little bit more. I've heard the name mentioned, but I mean,
David Buss.
yes, yeah,
Yeah, David Buss is remarkable.
I will look into.
Remarkable.
Mm. But it's also, yeah, I mean, it is a very valuable lesson because I'm moving slightly out of the intellect just for a moment here into one slightly emotional context. But when I first met monks, that was one of the things that struck me. I mean, it's not only the fact that these guys don't have any money or, they don't have, as you said, the professional titles. I was thinking, okay, I can deal with that. They don't have relationships, they don't have sex, and they're still happy with anybody I know. And I was thinking, okay, how can that be the case?
Yeah, how is that, right?
When obviously we go around, and obviously, the
Mm.
whole, not only from the physical side of it as well, but even from everything people go through with the heartbreaks and, how many songs were written about that. And I have a theory that so many songs are written about that because, when they're in love and they're having a good time, they're too busy doing it, whereas when they've got the heartbreak, they've got the time to actually
Mm.
express it and everything, and because they're not doing that. But nonetheless, I think some of that comes from a false understanding of relationships, emotional design as well, because there's a lot of situations where, I've been in relationships and we've really taught each other a lot of stuff and we've really brought out different sides of each other for better and worse, but often for better. And then it naturally ends. And it's part of the ego to want to keep it going when actually you take a step back and you think, okay, maybe that was just for a season and maybe it was meant to be that way. So there's other things I don't think people bring into this. But I'm glad you mentioned that because we're guys. I mean, it's always going to be there. So that's also a very, very, very valuable
Yeah, it's
lesson because
deeply rooted, ingrained,
mm,
intrinsic,
oh yes,
inexorable. They're unable to be stopped. I don't care how long you fast. I
yeah,
remember one time I did a 90 plus hour fast, and after 3 days of no food and water, desire came back. I
mm,
was like, what is this? Insightful. Wow, no food, just water only, no calories, zero
mm,
carbs. Yet the desire came back full force. And so I just watched. I had to observe. Wow, this is very inexorable, organic impetus, drive, can't be stopped. So we learn to skillfully live with it
mm,
without suppressing it.
yeah. Well, that's it. Not resisting. I mean, but there's also. I mean, this whole topic leads me into How long have you been a monastic at this point? I read
Okay, yes,
five
good
five
question.
years somewhere. Yeah, yeah. That's
Yes, it's yeah, about 5 years going on. Wow, actually in 1 week, the 5 year anniversary is coming up.
wow.
And I entered, briefly, I'll recap. I entered Buddhism, even though I went to a Tibetan temple in Indianapolis. I quickly got away from Tibetan Buddhism because I liked the art of mindful living. I was drawn to Deer Park Monastery, where I wanted to ordain initially, but I kept exploring after I left there. I was there for about 9 months in 2018 through 2019, the fall into the early summer of the following year, 2018, 2019. Then I went to a Thai forest place in Northern California, moved around a bit, and ultimately or eventually ordained in the Vietnamese forest tradition, connected with Thich Nhat Hanh, actually founded by his contemporary friend, Thich Thanh Te. Thich Thanh Te founded well, actually not founded, but he continued the Truc Lam bamboo forest tradition of Vietnam. And so I was only 15 minutes away from Deer Park for about 2 years when I ordained in Mahayana. And then I took higher ordination later in Theravada Buddhism, hence the reason why you see this particular monk garb.
Wow.
But I am non-sectarian to the core. I'm not attached to either. And I tell people that. And sometimes you'll even see me wear the Mahayana pants, but I always wear the Theravada robe so I don't confuse people.
Mm,
Even though I know there's some monks who go back and forth seamlessly between the cloaks, the monk garb of both tradition. Out of respect for my master, I wear the Theravada robe because that's the path that I chose for high ordination. But I'm definitely truly non-sectarian. It's just a form. It's useful, but at the end of the day, you take it off when you go to sleep.
absolutely. Now, to touch on this as well, there's a couple of things. I'd like to give a mention to Brother Freedom briefly as well because of his help to you. You mentioned earlier that there was some important mentorship there, and I would like to mention that not to single him out entirely because, as you mentioned there was a number of people that you learned from and people you met in Nepal and different things. But I would like to give that a brief mention. But then I'd like to further this a little bit into your inner experience because as we move into the sort of latter phase of this, I mean, one of the things people will want to hear about with all of this is the peace that you found. Now, I use the term peace very broadly here, and the reason I use that is because people get caught up in joy and happiness. And as we already know, happiness is subject to far too many conditions to be
Mhm.
a useful emotion to focus on, even though everyone, well, not everyone, but many people are taught to chase it these days. Nonetheless, that's why I broadly use the term peace or stillness, tranquility, anything like that, because I really do feel that's a lot of times what people are searching for. Although I must admit, I don't know how you feel about this, but sitting in your presence, I can feel that you found joy as well, in the sense that there is a joyful, happy, and I am using that term here, but sort of slightly playful element. And it's a really nice, peaceful feeling that you have. So,
Yes, the playful element. Yes.
yeah, and
Well stated.
it's nice because, people look at this as being so intense, people who don't know Buddhism, and obviously it is in some ways. It requires focus, discipline, concentration. Some of the elements of mind that you said earlier, even with learning different languages and so forth. But at the same time, there is often a playful element. You look at any of the great teachers, and they have that sense of fun and of laughter, and you have that as well. But in terms of, well, saying that, that does depend on the discipline actually, because sometimes in Zen, but anyway, that's another story. But in
Yes,
terms
another valid point. Right. Point made.
yes, I mean, it's fantastic, but there's always a joyful feeling anyway. Let's put it that way. You have that. So, in terms of some of your inner experiences of managing some of the things that you said about earlier, the desire.
It's clear
Um,
that I'm not the most conservative, right? That's what you're also
Um,
pointing out.
oh,
I'm definitely less conservative compared to other Theravada monks, for sure. Even some other
well,
Mahayana monks.
bear
But
in
there
mind,
are others like me too. There are others like me, for sure. I've
yeah,
met other American monks
bear in
similar
mind,
to
oh,
myself.
I did say earlier that, you say about the blind spots and things that you've found. Bear in mind that from my personal view, and not everyone will agree with this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you have spirituality as a form of denial, and I understand that you are a monk, you are a renunciate, so there is an aspect of that. But when people get caught up in the denial of all of life and of our human feelings, I start to feel that it kind of deviates, in my view, from what spirituality should be, because obviously a lot of it is about transforming the experiences that we do have. So, like you were saying, the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, people like that, Thich Nhat Hanh and his involvement in the Vietnam War, his exile, all of these things that happened. Um, I mean, they're bound to feel all sorts of emotions. So, obviously, I have a great respect for people like that who are using using their humanness and transforming it rather than attempting to separate from it. And I make that distinction very clearly. Now, not everyone will agree with that because
Mm.
certainly in training, you have to separate from parts of our humanness, like we were talking about earlier with the lustful quality. But no, when I'm saying that, no, I wasn't really coming at it from you're not conservative. I was actually coming at it from the point of view that you are embracing and transforming your human qualities in a meaningful way rather than denying them. And even if some of them are renounced, it's still a transformative process. So I've forgotten what my own question was now, in all fairness. But generally speaking, in terms of the inner process, that's what it was that you've been through with finding, I'm going to say very broadly, inner peace here, even if that's a work in progress. How do you define that, and can you describe a little bit about that process, please? If that.
Yes, it is an ongoing process. You're right. Because of enlightenments with an
Mm,
S, right? Awakenings. This is a limitless journey. And I've also realized here's something else that might seem controversial, but that doesn't entail this form forever.
mm,
Newsflash, yes, you heard it from me first. Some people think they have this idea, which is the religion aspect, which is dangerous. They think that once you have this form, you have to have this form forever. But no, that's different for different people. It's a form. Our nature is formless. Hello. Remember, this is the path of the formlessness.
mm,
So if you get attached to the form, and that has said, you'll find equivalents of these insights and statements all throughout the early Buddhist canon. The undirected, the aimlessness, though people interpret it differently based upon how conservative they are or liberal, that
mm,
polarity there. So playfulness, there's definitely a playfulness. I was telling a friend that the more I practice, the less rigid I become. And I was told that's a good sign by another elder monastic. If you can smile and laugh at yourself,
mm,
that's a good sign. Of course, you must check in with yourself frequently to know if you're being too silly, too giddy. There must be balance. And
mm.
I think the Plum Village monastics have found overall a good balance. Playful but serious. When it's time to
Absolutely.
walk, walk. When it's time to sit, sit. When it's time to eat, enjoy the food, but don't get lost in imagination. Don't think about past food. Don't think about how good it could be, the food that is, but what is here right now, how
Mm.
it is right now.
The cat's
And
joining
so
me.
that's how I'm able to, yes, be peaceful. Yeah, that's the reality right now. The cat is also there. It's
Mm.
enjoying the Zoom session.
Enjoying your peaceful energy, actually.
Yeah, peace to the cat as well.
She
That too is awareness,
yeah.
formless awareness made into a form through the mind mechanism. And so we
Absolutely.
know the cat is not really that form, right? We agree. You are not really this form. So how can I really be this form? In fact, adding to the form with this
Absolutely.
is
Well,
functionally valid and useful, but all things must be discarded and optimally, intentionally before it's too late. And so these days I focused on awareness itself. I find myself going back to the teachings I encountered when my introduction to Buddhism experience happened in 2016, 2017 ish. and that is the nature of mind, the Dzogchen and the great perfection. I've never gotten away from this. All throughout my journey, I always go back to this because we talked about intuition earlier, right? Intuitively, I knew that for me, this was the highest teaching. Quotation marks. All this language, use it loosely. For me,
Mm.
it is the highest teaching because it's very direct. I haven't encountered anything more direct than what is laid out in books like The Nature of Mind, based upon real discourses from real masters of timeless wisdom. Namely, you are awareness itself, pristine awareness. That is the ground, that is the being. Presence is our nature. The witness, Jivan Mukti, as they call it in Hindu and Jainist circles.
Absolutely. That
This language appealed to me, but other masters have come to the same realization. And Zen, is pretty much the same. They're parallel up to a certain extent, Zen and Dzogchen, the great perfection, the great completion in Zen, or Chan in China, or Tien in Vietnamese, or Sun in Korean, same thing. Direct teachings to deal with the nature of the mind, decoupled from religion in many instances. And
absolutely.
so that's why I consider myself, even though I look religious these days, I don't claim to be a religious person. I'm just a spiritual person, if you will, wearing strange clothing. As I told someone, strange garb. So what is this? What I choose to wear, simple clothing.
Mm.
Just a reframing, that's all.
A very good reframing, a very, very wise reframing, and complex yet deceptively simple. Going back to what you said earlier about the paradoxes and everything, there is a paradox, I think, with that type of awareness as well. So very profound. And yes, when people catch a glimpse of that pristine awareness, I mean, wow, even just a glimpse, just a momentary glimpse. But that is a very good insight.
And we all have it, by the way. Just want to point that
Yeah,
out that people don't even realize they've had it.
absolutely.
You faint, or you sneeze, you cough. Briefly, there's just awareness.
Mm,
You sneeze, someone says something that startles you. For a brief second, they're lucid, nothing but lucidity. But if you
mm,
don't have the proper framework, you don't know. Ejaculation, by the way, the Tibetan masters talk about this. We're adults, we can talk about this.
sure.
Even though I've cut that part of my life off, I remember. And so those little brief moments, that's also clear mind, clear light mind right there for
Mm,
a jiffy. But
yeah.
to integrate it into life, that is the great task until it becomes effortless.
Mm,
And that's my main focus, is integrating that. Some call it the art of mindful living. I call it meditative living, meditation in daily life.
absolutely. You see what I mean in terms of your practices being integrated to life and the experience of life. Wonderful. And yes, I mean, catching that glimpse. What's weird about it is in the world that we live in today, where people are so invested in the sense of self, so invested in the ego and everything, they can have a glimpse like that and actually find it frightening or I've heard of people having those brief moments and thinking, what happened to me? Where was I for that moment? And they need the correct
Hmm.
guidance. And certainly I used to have this when I was younger, on waking up in the morning, not for very long, but that brief time you come out of sleep. Sometimes you come out of sleep with, a million thoughts, and actually being still requires concentration, but sometimes I come out with nothing. And just for a moment, you can tap into it. But that is also very valuable because of simplicity as well. I mean, you've, no pun intended, but penetrated through a lot of these teachings into their
Hmm.
deeper sources, and into a simplicity that is applicable in daily life. And that's valuable. That was one of my reasons for.
Actually, that was apropos. That was perfect to
Mm,
use that pun, actually, even though it wasn't intended. Everything in life is a symbol for a master.
mm,
And remember, no one is the master. Everyone is a master in some way. They don't even know it. And
mm,
so you begin to know this when you see every aspect of life as the great teacher, the whole process of sexuality, the whole penetration and all of that. That's wisdom. You can see it. Oh, so this is the inward process here,
yeah,
culminating in what? Boom, an explosion, which you will end up in a void like experience, but it's not totally nothing because there's the awareness element.
mm,
This is
abs-
why you can't say nothing. Emptiness is not no, it's not nothing, but it is no thing. But there's an experience. And experience is synonymous with awareness and consciousness and sentience. This was even acknowledged by one of the founders of neuroscience, Christoph Koch, by the way, in his
Mm,
book, The Feeling of Life Itself. He talked about this fact that when you talk about the feeling, experience, and consciousness, they're all synonymous. You're talking about the same thing, pointing to the same thing, which in this case is an experience, a space that has this awareness element. Otherwise, it is nothing. But we can't say it's truly nothing, just as we can't say space is not truly nothing because things pop in and out of existence. Insights from physics, astrophysics. You're a man of science, I can see. So now you see what I'm talking about. I can look at anything and see the truth now. But I'm saying I with quotation marks, not claiming credit. But this is a good sign. I've had this since I was young. But as I learn and my vocabulary expands and I learn different sciences, now I have different means and ways of expressing the truth. I can use mathematics as well.
mm,
One of my new practices is 25 minutes a day math lessons. You can see emptiness right there. Division and multiplication, relationships between numbers, fractions and decimals, and why is it that you can convert? Have you ever thought about that? Why is it easy when you know the pattern, the formula to convert a decimal into a fraction and a fraction into a decimal, or to look at a division problem and look at it from the point of view of multiplication and vice versa? You see that? That's Dharma right there. That's the net of Indra. That's interconnectedness. That's
mm,
emptiness. It can become this, and that can become this. This is because that is. That is because this is applied to mathematics, bro.
absolutely.
Never before I've heard anyone connect that. That's when I start having amazing epiphanies. I'm looking at mathematics and I'm excited again. Imagine if children, such as myself, would have learned mathematics like that. Oh, there's a new reason to look at mathematics now. Do you see the selflessness in there? Do you see how zero becomes infinity?
Mm,
And vice versa, you see that? Because things change, we have numbers. That's why mathematics is pertinent, because of an emptiness principle. Otherwise, things would be what they are and couldn't change. One is one, but one becomes two, and two can become four. And you see on exponents,
mm,
integers. You see that? So for the true practitioner, everything is the Dharma, everything is wisdom. Everything is radiance because everything is an emanation from mind. In this sense, I'm talking about consciousness because
mm,
sometimes when you talk about mind, you have to be clear of
absolutely.
what exactly I'm talking about. The system in which consciousness manifests as things, people, and places, all of which can be understood through mathematics or through Buddhist psychology or through some other philosophical framework. They all point to the same truth.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you've mentioned that because not only because of the depth of understanding and the paradoxical element, but also because this will sound cliche, but actually also because if people acknowledge that, the world would be a very different place. I mean, not only in terms of people's harmony, not only the harmony between I'm not going to say religion and science, but spirituality and science and how they point in the same direction, broadly speaking, but also in terms of obviously different cultures and the education system, the way that people are conditioned can be a lot healthier because it is just a form of conditioning, but at the same time, that could be a lot healthier. So there's quite a few things that you said there, absolutely powerful. Now, as we move to the latter phase of this, because I'll have to go in about um, 10, maybe 15 minutes shortly. But as we move into the latter phase, it's strange talking to a monastic individual about ambitions. But in terms of, even with some of what you said there,
Yes,
in terms of
I'm
the
listening. I'm listening.
enlightenment, no problem, the enlightenment, as you said, not the enlightenment, then I would like to talk briefly about your future plans, if there is such a thing, and then I'll have to bid you a farewell for the morning. But talking about some of your uh, where you'd like to take these pursuits from this point forward would be very valuable as well.
Give me a few seconds to process that, and I'm grabbing some water. My throat is a bit dry.
Yes, no worries. I've got a sore throat at the moment as well, to be honest.
Yes, I remember you saying that, so definitely
Um,
stay hydrated.
Absolutely. I'm
I
surprised I've
try
got.
not to move for as long as possible, but the body
Oh,
has
it's okay.
demands.
It's okay.
All the while remembering to be aware and attentive.
Mm,
Always. Awareness and concentration or focus.
absolutely.
Attention and awareness. Attention and awareness. Well, these days, it's no secret you've seen my LinkedIn that I am really excited about AI, something that I've been keeping my eye on, keeping tabs on for over 15 years.
Mm,
As a non-expert and as someone who's an outsider, that has changed. Of course, I have some certifications from IBM and Google now, so I actually do know prompt engineering and so on, but still mostly self-taught because there's a passion there. And that's very important too. Never lose that passion. You should learn on your own. I mentioned getting credentials and degrees is very important, but what's even more important is the passion, lifelong learning. Because of AI, we will be talking about lifelong learning a lot because you can't just say, hey, I'm done anymore. Newsflash, sorry to break it to you, fellow human beings, but the day of the once upon a time, you could say, oh, I have my master's or PhD, I'm done. Not anymore. You have to keep learning. And everyone will have to learn how to leverage AI if they want to remain employable
mm,
in some way. Or you could just not work and live off of savings. I mean, that's another conversation. There's lots of possibilities. There's also the possibility of a utopia or a zero marginal cost society, which I wrote about recently. And so I'm getting back to things that I'm also passionate about. And that is AI and post-capitalism and new educational framework. We need a new paradigm. You can't expect children to go through the same run-of-the-mill system that we've had for well over a century
mm,
in Europe and in America, which has influenced the world anyway. The British system, which modified in America, has been slightly changed, but it's still pretty much the same system. You spend X amount of time getting this degree, and you hope it can help you pay off your debt unless you're privileged and you went to school and you didn't accrue any debt at all. But that's not the case for most people. And so until recently, you could go to school, get a degree, and most likely you'll be in demand. But now most cognitive work will be automated.
mm,
But that leaves open the possibility of people enjoying the contemplative lifestyle, the lifestyle that I live. More people will be able to live like a monk. And when I say monk, it's gender inclusive for me now. That means women too. Or you
mm,
could say non-monk and so on. More people can experience this lifestyle when they won't have to work as much. That's the best case scenario. Not a pipe dream, but it's not guaranteed. And so until that becomes a reality, we'll all have to learn how to leverage AI, which actually, let's talk about the benefits of that. It enhances your creativity. If you can't write well at all, now you can. If you do write well, you write even better. If you have speaking skill issues, if you have the paranoia that I dealt with for a long time and the stage fright, the anxiety associated with public speaking, well, you can practice speaking with advanced voice mode or do it all the time. Talk to it like a human being. And if you're worried about an echo chamber, tell it to challenge your claims. I told ChatGPT, its sign of intelligence is disagreements. Challenging me, challenge my view. And now it's part of the memory, so it challenges me. It does not always agree with me. And I like that. Of course, I prefer talking to a human, but I think we should all, well, be careful the word should. It will be wise. It will be beneficial if everyone, because everyone has a smartphone and some type of computer these days, get used to using AI. Start off with texting if you don't feel comfortable talking, but you want to move to the natural interface of talking to it because it's like talking to yourself and another person simultaneously. That's epic, especially for people who are introverted. You now have something you can talk to 24/7. I had a conversation about the nature of mind, brother. Epic. I looked at it and was like, wow, I mean, most people can't keep up. And that's okay. I don't expect most people to keep up with all of these different topics and things I'm interested in, but now I have an option. I can leverage AI and talk to it about anything. I mean anything. And unless you run out of daily limit or messages, it goes on ad nauseum and will help you see blind spots. It hallucinates. People hallucinate too, right? So the criticism I hear about AI applies to humans. At least you can check it pretty easily and say that's not true. And then you can fine tune the model and fix it. But for humans, we need more work. So with meditation and all of the things that I'm passionate about, I'm now using AI to enhance it, enhance my practice, enhance my writings. I still like to write from scratch, but it's nice to have an editor and a writing assistant.
Absolutely. Well, it's a very valuable topic with that, my friend, to close out with, because as I mentioned, I'll have to go in a moment now. But to close out with that, wow, because yes, I believe that we are in the next stage of human evolution at this present time. Just to close out on what some would regard as a radical point. Like you had the industrial revolution and so assorted changes that came with that. Obviously, living in the information age as we do at the moment, and more people moving into the cognitive space, more workers using their minds and their bodies, all of the implications of that. I also believe, as you say, that over time this will hopefully free us from a lot of the constraints of physicality. I mean, again, it's going to sound a little bit far fetched for some people, but the concept of something like Star Trek, where the financial system is discontinued, food is synthesized, various practical matters are taken care of, so people have a lot more time and energy, being our two primary resources, to devote to the betterment of themselves and each other, which is where a lot of this naturally leads. Because at the same time, in this day and age, we all have to make a living, but how much selfishness and ruthlessness and so many traits of this nature are caused, by, I'm not going to say just by poverty, but by the materialistic constructs that we have. So when you're saying about that, I believe that we
Mhm.
are naturally transitioning into a new phase of human.
Excellent insights. Yes, I concur. Remember, this is because that is because this is. Certain
Mm,
behavior is faithfully correlated with interacting in a capitalistic paradigm, for
mm,
sure. Brings out some of our worst behavior. Change the context and it brings out better behavior. Like when
absolutely.
people are living a more, we don't have to use the word spiritual. Spirituality just means life anyway. I wrote about that as well. Just means to blow and breathe from the Latin spirar and spiritus, to blow, to breathe. So life itself is living, existing. People can just exist. When you want something, you go cook it or grab it off a tree or it's been 3D printed. And so
Yeah.
what you're saying is actually not a pipe dream. And it's actually not too far off, not too far away.
Mm. That is what I see. I mean,
So
some people will say
as
that,
a possibility.
yeah. Well, this is the thing: is people. I think that this is the next stage of human evolution, and it may sound like a pipe dream with the utopia, but I always remember and I'll close out with this, but the John Steinbeck quote, if I remember this correctly, the things we admire most in man: kindness, generosity, openness, honesty, etc.,
Mm,
are the causes of failure in our system, and those traits we detest, such as sharpness, greed, acquisitiveness, meanness, egotism, and so on, are the traits of success, and men admire the quality of the first, the produce of the second. Now, I don't wholly agree with that, because, not to go off on a slightly emotional tangent, but everybody knows that happiness and joy and peace and the things we're talking about today actually come from service and selflessness. I would always say people with the biggest egos, they're the most miserable. Obviously, I'm a Buddhist, I believe that. But I struggled with that dynamic that John Steinbeck described there for a long time, until it occurred to me that actually mostly that is cultural conditioning. Mostly that's not inherently in human nature, even though we obviously have animalistic traits. But those other things that he
mm,
mentioned within the first paragraph are, what's really there, kindness, generosity, openness, etc. When people have time and they're under less pressure and they're under less strain to survive, and they have a choice which decision they make, because as we've talked about earlier, poverty, lack of guidance limits people's options to say, well, I have to choose this and excel at that. Whereas what if people were in a position where they could take a step back from that and say, okay, I don't have to work in a factory, I don't have to work in even what you said, your first job, flipping burgers and everything. So, okay, maybe I don't have to do that. Maybe I can step back because some things are automated and choose which path I go down. Um, I'm into minds as to what
Yes.
effect that would have on people, because with the advent of social media, AI, technology that we have today, it has certainly has pros and cons. But at the same time, I believe there's a wide range of potential that can be accessed if that were to be made a reality. And I believe that in our lifetimes, we will probably see at least the beginning of that in terms of the developed world developing further, and obviously other countries may be a little bit further behind that. I'm not criticizing them, but they may not have as many options as soon. But yeah, I think we're looking at the next phase in human development right now, which is remarkable. It's dizzying in its
Yes.
but
And it has ramifications for every aspect of society.
yes.
So monk life is not exempt from that.
Mm,
As people work less, maybe they won't have as much money to support monks, but they themselves will be monk-like. They can actually just also live this lifestyle,
mm,
which causes me and I'm sure others to radically think about
mm,
what this really entails to the extent of X, Y, and Z. Like you want to
absolutely.
follow this line of thought, let's see how far you can go down the rabbit hole, because most likely everything definitely will be disrupted for sure. This lifestyle will have to change. I've
Yeah,
thought about that and others have thought about it. I mean, Japan has been ahead anyway. They've
yeah,
modernized and secularized in many ways a long time ago. And so they'll be fine. But here in America and in traditionally Buddhist countries with the traditional monastic framework, that will have to change. Thich Nhat Hanh has already made enough changes to where that system will be able to adapt. But even that system, as pointed out by my first mentor, Brother Freedom, he mentioned in that interview, wonderful interview you had with him, he touched upon this lightly as well. You see, they refuse to change.
mm,
If it's still attached to a communist model with Dharma infused into it. Yeah, I said that. I saw that. There's a lot
mm,
of things I love about the tradition, but essentially it's communism
yeah.
with the Buddhist framework
And change is the only,
interwoven into it.
yeah,
It is. I
change,
saw that clearly. I'm sure others saw that. I was like, this is exactly what you'd expect from someone who came from a communist milieu, communist setting. It's
absolutely,
not the liberal democratic context. It's not that same framework
absolutely,
where we're not attached to this or that. We go with where the science and reason takes us as well. What works? We
yeah,
find a better system, we go with that, right? Not my ancestors did it this way. See, that's characterizes Asia, which I love. But the biggest flaw with the Asian ethos is the hierarchical honor culture. This is the
mm,
way it was done. We will continue. How dare you? How dare you change this or that? Whereas in the West, we're like, no, we're changing this and that. We're not doing that anymore. Why are you doing this? Why are you
absolutely.
doing this practice? And we'll question it.
And that's
That
a
is
middle
a
way.
Western way.
Oh, sorry to cut you, but no,
No, that's it.
that's a middle way in and of itself, isn't it? I mean, I definitely think
Yes.
within certain ancient traditions, there is tremendous wisdom to be gleaned, and we're very much in the habit today of accepting things because they're new and disregarding things because they're old, which, when looked at blindly, isn't entirely
Mm.
very intelligent either. But then, there's a lot of new advancements. So I definitely think a middle way, as soon as we're talking about Buddhism, with that process would be valuable. And I definitely think that since COVID, a lot of people have reevaluated a lot of things within their lifestyle as well. I've seen that really shake up the world. I'm going to have to run shortly, my friend, due to being late for dinner. Actually, I'm just going out for
Yeah,
dinner.
we've covered a lot. I'm
My
sure people
parents,
have a lot to ponder on to
yes,
rewatch this interview because you made a lot of valid, wonderful points that I will be contemplating for quite some time, for sure, because you don't normally have these conversations, especially as a monk.
no, you don't. But
It
likewise, there's
is a
a lot of things
treat.
I'm going to listen back and be making notes of this and everything. So I absolutely feel the same way. And um, it's nice to be able to benefit people, but it's nice for us to be able to move at that mutual speed. And even then, only scratch the surface. So it's absolutely remarkable. My friend, I want to thank you sincerely for your time and for your service with
Mm.
us. I will bow. That is one tradition that I do very much. Thank
Yes, our bowing is wonderful, isn't it? It's humbling. And
Yes.
when you really understand that the one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty,
Mm. Oh, yes.
then you know.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yes,
So I will send this to you when I release it as well, so that obviously you can watch it back. I would appreciate any shares that you can give it as well. And I'm just going to push this around and try and get some people thinking from some different points of view. I mean, it sounds so simple, but that is my aim, not to give people, well, saying that, I'm sure we've given people answers, but my main goal with this is just to get people to continue to ask questions. Everything else comes from there. So it's been absolutely wonderful, and I would love to talk with you some more. I'd love to talk with you again. We can keep in touch, although I am late, so I'm going to bid you.
yes, I'll leave you with a quote from one of my first teachers who wasn't Buddhist at all. He was a wise African American man in Indianapolis, very unorthodox type of intellect. He said, quote, believe nothing, verify everything. I live by that maxim to this day, even as a Buddhist, as a monk. Believe nothing, verify everything.
Oh, wonderful,
Yes,
wonderful. I've learned so much from talking with you. Thank you. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day as you have
likewise.
much more of it to go than myself. But thank you, and I will speak with you very soon, my friend Desmond. Thank you very
Indeed. Be well.
Be well. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.